Well, hello, toy fans of all ages. Scott Toy Guru Neitlich here. I've been in the toy industry for over 20 years. I've worked for big toy companies, I've worked for small toy companies. I've mostly worked in the action figure category, as opposed to dolls or wheel play, cars, plush, that type of thing. Because, well, quite frankly, I'm a huge action figure fan myself. And that's why today I'm going to take you through a brief history of modern action figures. But before we do that, let's take a quick look at something kind of funny. Alright, so in no particular order, this is kind of my I can't believe they made that as an action figure top 10. No offense to anyone who worked on these, because I might have even worked on some of these. Alright, honorable mention going to be the Secret Saturdays Popa Bawa figure from Mattel. And the reason is if you know the mythology behind this particular character, it is someone who comes in the middle of the night into children's rooms and, well, basically does really bad things to them that I'm not going to talk about because there's preschool toys present. But yeah, it got pulled really quickly once they realized what they did. And next up, you've probably seen this one on other lists before, the infamous Rocky Meat action figure, which was Jack's attempt to sell an accessory as an action figure. Always a good idea to do that. Those sell really well. Next up, we have Sportsman Spider-Man, because, you know, when everyone thinks of Spider-Man, they think of him fishing and playing archery and going for hikes in the woods. Number 8, Ice Cream Maker Guy. Okay, I'll admit, even I wanted this one, but like, this is really digging at the bottom of the barrel as far as obscure characters. But hey, he did come with that ice cream maker, which the Mandalorian reused as a container for precious metal, so hey, cool. Number 7, the Shushing Librarian, part of Accoutrements figure line. Yeah, this action figure had a shushing action feature. I guess that was cool, but still, what the heck? But hey, you know, everyone should really get an action figure to celebrate what they do in life, and, you know, librarians are unsung heroes, right? Okay. Number 6, Arm Wrestling Stallone. Oh yes, they actually did licensed products for his 80s arm wrestling movie, and you could get figures that would arm wrestle with each other because, you know, so aspirational for kids. That's, you know, instead of arm wrestling themselves, they could just have their action figures do it. Sure, why not? Alright, number 5, Drunk E.T. Yes, because when you're looking for variants of E.T. to fill out your product line, doing a version that looks and is called on packaging as being drunk is definitely top of the idea pile. Sure, hey, why not? Number 4, Clown Michelangelo. Yeah, towards the end of that 80s Ninja Turtle line, they kind of started doing a lot of variants. And yeah, Michelangelo as a circus clown? Hey, sure, why not? He did this all the time in the comic books and the cartoon show, so, you know, kids love clowns, why not? Number 3, Fearsome Flush. Well, you know, I mean, actually, it's not a bad idea. Kids do like toilets and potty humor, and why not make the toilet that's going to eat you? Because, you know, kids love that kind of thing. This was actually a really popular figure, but still had to include it on my kind of what the heck list of figures made, because, you know, I'll think about this one every time I use the toilet. Number 2, Jesus with rocket launcher. You know, because that was right there, right, in the Gospel of Mark, the part where he gets a rocket launcher and fires it at the armies of Satan. I remember that chapter in the Bible really well, and I'm glad that someone finally made an action figure based on that specific verse. Number 1, Inappropriate Tarzan. Yeah, go look this one up. You'll see his action feature is incredibly inappropriate, especially because he makes that howling noise while his arm is going up and down, up and down, up and down. How did Mattel let this one get through? I don't know, but it shipped. Alright, so now we're actually getting to the history of action figures, and first we gotta look at some precursors of action figures. So, you know, stone versions of characters goes back hundreds of thousands of years. And believe it or not, archaeologists have found a lot of toys that were, or stone figures that were actually toys and not just idols or other religious figurines. But, kids still needed toys in, the Roman era, etc., etc. And of course, the immediate precursors for action figures were things like W. Britton, metal soldiers, and then things like Major Matt Mason. And of course, then you had, things like G.I. Joe, the $6 Million Man, Big Jim, and even Mego. These were, definitely action figures, but they weren't, really what we think of action figures as far as, plastic figures today, 6-inch scale, that kind of thing. A lot of these were 12 inches. They had cloth parts, some even rooted hair. And then came Star Wars. Obviously, this wouldn't be a video about the history of action figures without mentioning this mega brand, but this really was the one that changed kind of everything. It created the modern action figure category, and it really brought the idea of small figures and that broad concept of linking entertainment to a toy line, to an action figure line. Previous to this, movies just didn't sell toys. There was Planet of the Apes. Merchandise goes all the way back to the 30s with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, but movie merchandise just didn't sell until Star Wars. Star Wars was the game changer with that. And this really opened what is called the era of minifigures / high fantasy, where you had figures that were much smaller than 12-inch, much smaller than 8-inch, and they were all linked to these fantastical environments and properties. After that, we get into the era of transformation and kid mastery. These are toys coming shortly after, on the the heels of Star Wars and He-Man, where they involved things changing from one mode to the other. Obviously, Transformers comes to mind immediately, and it really had that empowerment factor for kids because they could feel like they accomplished something with their toy, transforming it from one mode to the other. And of course, there were, tons of, I wouldn't call them rip-offs, but, in the same category, you had GoBots and you had Mask. You had a lot of properties in the mid-'80s that were very similar, having that play pattern of mastery from one mode to the other and giving kids that feeling of empowerment. And, it wasn't just, robots turning into things. Again, I mentioned Mask. This was just a vehicle into another vehicle, but it also came from that, putting on the mask on the action figure's head that gave him his power. So again, very aspirational for kids. After that, we get into the era of outrageous concepts, which were, things that had kind of gross out and kind of like, wacky, cowabunga kind of stuff. So, Ghostbusters, Ninja Turtles, WWF before they became WWE, Power Rangers. These were toys that were just, high on the concept and the action play or the action feature, which was actually started by He-Man back 2 eras ago, but it was really brought to the next level where figures were designed around this action feature. And, there was a lot of physical play with the figures. They weren't going in, spaceships, and they weren't transforming into other things, but they were really versus each other. And, they got into some wackiness. The Ghostbusters line had a lot of wacky figures. Ninja Turtles was notorious for being wacky. They're driving around in a giant blimp, and, these are Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, if you will. Just the name itself. Yeah, I know the original comic was kind of dark, but, we all know that Ninja Turtles were very wacky with, pizza eating and cowabunga and all that. Power Rangers, too, while this started in Japan, it also kind of fell into this category, and you had these primary colored ninja characters with, and also with transforming robots that went back to that previous era with Transformers, also with, of course, the Japanese link there. So this was another way that made its way forward. After that, we get into the emergence of the adult collector. So this is when the kids from the 70s and 80s are now growing up, and now they're starting to buy toys for themselves. And you see the emergence of things like Batman, Star Trek, McFarlane's Spawn, and what I would call Star Wars Round 2, which was launched in 1995 as the Power of the Force 2. So this is when you're starting to get figures that are really appealing beyond just kids. adults weren't buying toys in the 80s the way they started doing so in the mid to late 90s. And you were getting figures that were more comic accurate, they were more specific to shows and specific episodes, and you had an emphasis on completing teams or completing crews so you could have the entire set, both the females and the males, whereas previously, action figures were very much a boy's property and girls weren't that common. You also had things, Jurassic Park kind of falls into this category, where, yes, you had the kid-aimed action figures, but you had, a lot of dinosaurs and a lot of characters that appealed to the adults that grew up with those wacky toys from the 80s that were now looking for more mature things. And when you're talking about mature things, Spawn and McFarlane Toys definitely falls in that category. They kind of introduced the idea of hyper sculpting, where sculpting and details and paint ops became a huge part of the figure and not just, a basic toy. And again, the Star Wars Round 2, when they brought Star Wars back, but it definitely had much more of an adult collector spin versus the original toys that were just aimed at kids. You were now getting sort of a perfect version of a figure you had as a kid with more articulation, more details. And then now, kind of that last era is what I call the era of the form factor. I did a whole video about form factors, but this is really where figures are being transformed into any way they can be sold. From Pez dispensers to toys to pops to plush. You can get characters in almost any form factor these days. So what does the future hold? We've been through a lot of different eras of action figures over the past 30 years. And really, with the emergence of the adult collector, and now adult collectors are having kids themselves, when the emergence happened, adult collectors were really in college, but now they have kids. Some of them collect by the character. This is a fan who likes Juggernaut. And, their kids are going now more and more towards apps, or apps becoming the new toy, the new action figure. I mean, yes, there's that dopamine hit kids get from playing apps, and that's not a healthy dopamine hit. I'll have a video about that coming up. But play is still important, and play is still going to be a huge part of children's lives. And if we're not making toys that allow them to express themselves through play, then we're doing it an injustice. Because kids who are using apps alone are getting a dopamine hit from, dings and dongs off of apps, and that's not healthy for children. So there's exciting times ahead. There are times for the toy industry and the licensing industry to really embrace play and get kids playing again. New brands come along all the time, new licenses, and understanding the emotional connection between toys, kids, and consumers is where it's all at. If you want to look more into this, contact us at spectracreative.com. We love to talk about the emotional connection between product, kids, parents, and why that emotional connection can lead to better and better product. Thanks for watching.